So evolutionary psych is not the only subfield of psychology that helps to explain prosocial behavior. There's also very good evidence that our cultural background and a lot of aspects of our social cognition layer on top of this evolutionary heritage to amplify our likelihood of acting altruistically. And so when thinking about this, I want to really consider the differences between other mammals like vampire bats and human beings. So there are some similarities. In the same way that vampire bats appear to have a totally genetic, totally instinctual propensity for reciprocal altruism, I would argue that human beings also have a totally genetic, totally instinctual propensity for reciprocal altruism. The same kinds of pressures of kin selection or reciprocal altruism that would apply to a meerkat or a monkey or a vampire bat definitely apply to us too. But layered on top of that, we have the potential to build cultures. We have the potential to build shared understandings and to teach each other how to behave. And so once on a cultural level, we decide that we value altruism and we value prosociality, we can then reinforce it through cultural norms. And that's what we're going to be talking about next. So this brings us to reason number 3. Maybe we help because our culture and our upbringing tell us to. The place I want to start with this is religious traditions, which for a lot of people are a core aspect of their worldview, their sense of right and wrong, and their sense of how to be a good person. So almost any religious tradition you turn to will have a lot of statements that really value prosocial behavior. So let's start with Islam. And this is a quote from the Quran, which says, "Whoever alleviates the situation of one in dire straits who cannot repay his debt, Allah will alleviate his lot in both this world and in the hereafter." If you turn to thinking about Buddhism, there's a quote from the Buddha who says, "Should a person do good, let him do it again and again. Let him find pleasure therein, for blissful is the accumulation of good." And if you turn to Christianity, the Bible is of course replete with verses that discuss various forms of taking care of others and acting in loving and compassionate ways. One of these is, "And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased." Now let's think about upbringing. So, if you've ever known a mother or a father of a small child, you have probably heard them say something like, "Be nice, don't say that to your sister, don't hit other little kids on the playground, share your toys, share your food," right? Early parenting is a non-stop gauntlet of trying to teach your kid how to be a pro-social person, how to teach your kid how to not be mean, to spread kindness and love rather than cruelty, and to share and take turns and generally be fair, right? So throughout our upbringing, most of us are getting non-stop messages encouraging prosociality. And also think about the way that our society is structured. So there is a very good reason that uber-rich people often have these social functions that are intertwined with charity, like charity galas. This is because we tend to like and respect and look up to other people who seem to be engaging in good works. Seeming like you are engaging in acts of charity or volunteerism tends to reap social rewards, right? It can lead actually to increases in status. So when you take all these messages together and you think about who we are supposed to help, who we are the most encouraged to give aid to, turns out that there's a pretty clear pattern. We are most obligated to give help when the potential recipient is weak or defenseless or really in need. We are less obligated to give help when the person is strong and capable, self-sufficient, or could easily be getting aid from other people. And so this would be the reason, for instance, that we tend to feel the strongest sense of compassion, the strongest urge to save, for instance, a baby animal versus an adult animal, or why we would often go out of our way to help an elderly person carry a heavy bag of groceries. We're probably never going to do this for somebody who looks like a strapping young man. Maybe unless that's the literal amount of groceries that person is carrying. Might make an exception there. And this can be summed up the social responsibility norm. And this is the idea that we are most obligated to help those who are specifically dependent on us for help. Again, if somebody could take care of the problem themselves or get help from other sources, you're kind of off the hook in terms of helping them. And so this brings us to reason number 4, which is that we help because it feels good. And I'm going to walk you through a couple different pieces of evidence that seem to indicate this. The first piece of evidence I'm going to discuss is actually an experimental study. So they actually approached total strangers in a public space. So the research assistant would come up to this person, hand them a fresh $20 bill, and they would either tell them, spend it on some kind of gift for somebody else or a charitable donation, or they would tell them, take this $20 and spend it on yourself. Buy whatever you want. The people who were told to spend the $20 on somebody else, whether through a gift or through a charitable donation, were actually happier when the research team called them up at the end of the day and asked them how they were feeling. That experience of doing something, spending money on somebody else, seemed to improve mood. So the final study I'm going to highlight here is a study that uses neuroimaging techniques. And what they did is they put people in an fMRI machine and they gave them the simple choice of how much of their $100 study payment to keep for themselves versus donate to a local food bank. And what they found is that there are actually a fair number of people who decided to donate all $100 of their payment to this food bank. Those people in particular showed high levels of activation of pleasure centers of the brain, these dopaminergic regions that would also be activated when people are experiencing sex or eating really yummy food or using drugs, for instance. So there seems to be something actually really fun and really satisfying about making a really generous choice. All right. So for a little bit of a summary, we've talked about some explanations of prosocial behavior that are based on evolved instincts. And these include things like the way that you can help family members, who of course share some of your genes, by taking risks that benefit them. And reciprocal altruism, which really leverages this norm of reciprocity, the idea that when you do favors for someone else at a time when you have extra resources, you might get that favor back at a time when you really need it. We contrasted these with explanations that are based more on social learning or in-the-moment emotions and thoughts, and these include the learned norm of social responsibility, which is specifically the idea that you are really on the hook to help people who are weak and vulnerable and really need your help specifically. We talked about how helping can often feel very good. But I also want you to remember that these two explanations are not only not mutually exclusive, they might actually support one another. So it's possible that helping feels good, partly because it can accrue benefits like reciprocal altruism. Not that that's what we're thinking consciously, but we may have evolved to enjoy helping because helping so often had benefits. And the social responsibility norm might not be possible if we didn't have this kernel or this seed of instincts that allowed us to be altruistic in the first place.